The thunder of the guns, a broadside in the time of Nelson. This narrative is proudly brought to you by Polly Speaks For You. At Polly Speaks For You, we are committed to empowering individuals, especially those with disabilities or learning challenges, through innovative text-to-speech and voice recognition technology. Polly Speaks For You is more than just software. It's a tool for self-expression, connecting people with the world in meaningful ways. By blending the richness of history with cutting-edge technology, Polly Speaks For You demonstrates that every voice, whether preserving the past or shaping the future, has the potential to inspire. While we strive to make the story engaging, our primary focus is on storytelling itself. The visuals are secondary. We're showcasing the remarkable capabilities of text-to-speech software that bring these stories to life. It was the morning of October 21st, 1805, and the HMS Victory was slicing through the cold, unforgiving waters of the Atlantic. The wind was sharp and the sky, heavy with the promise of a coming storm, hung low above us. Every wave that crashed against the ship seemed to echo the tension that gripped every man aboard. I could feel it in the way the ship's timbers groaned under the strain of the ocean, in the hushed whispers among the men, and in the nervous glances cast by the veterans. This was not just another day at sea. It was the day that would define the fate of the nation. I was a young sailor, barely 18, when I first set foot on the Victory. My hands were still soft then, and my heart was filled with dreams of glory. Little did I know that in just a few short hours, I would find myself in the thick of the deadliest battle I had ever witnessed. The officers and crew spoke in hushed tones, knowing that this battle would decide the fate of the war, and possibly our very lives. The orders had come directly from Admiral Lord Nelson himself. We would engage the French fleet at Trafalgar. Our mission was clear. We were to ensure that Napoleon's navy was broken, once and for all. His fleet had grown too powerful, and if we failed, it was said that the British Isles would fall under French rule. There would be no retreat, no quarter, no second chance. Victory or death. I had been assigned to one of the ship's lower decks, where the cannons roared like the thunder of an approaching storm. Here, amidst the smoke and the noise, I was to load and fire the great guns of the Victory. The lower deck of the ship was a cramped, suffocating place. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and sweat. It was a place of controlled chaos, where the crew worked in near silence, the sound of clanking metal and the shuffle of feet on the wooden floor the only noise. Our task was simple: load the cannon, fire it, and reload it again. Each cannonball, weighing over 32 pounds, had to be handled with care, and the process was grueling. But the stakes were high. We were fighting for the future of our country, and each shot we fired could be the one that turned the tide of the battle. As the Victory cut through the waves, I stood alongside men who had fought in countless battles before. Men like Gun Captain Blackwell, a grizzled veteran who had seen the worst the sea had to offer. He was a man who lived for battle, a man whose face was etched with the lines of experience. His eyes, though hard and weathered, still held a fire that I could only begin to understand. "Steady now, lads," Blackwell barked as we prepared the next round. "The French won't wait for us to catch our breath. Keep those guns loaded and your wits sharp. We're about to make history today, whether we're ready for it or not." His words, though harsh, had a calming effect. There was something about the certainty in his voice that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, we would survive this. The Victory was a proud ship, the pride of the Royal Navy. Her sails were pristine, and her cannons, though aged, were fierce. But it was the men aboard her, the ones who had sailed with Nelson through thick and thin, that made her unbeatable. The first sighting of the enemy fleet came just after noon. The lookout called down to the deck, his voice trembling with excitement. Or was it fear? Ships off the starboard bow. 3 ships, all of them flying the French flag. It wasn't long before we saw them, emerging from the mist like specters. Their sails were tattered, their hulls black and menacing. The enemy fleet, L'Aigle, Centaur, Indomitable, all formidable ships, all bristling with guns that could tear our ship to pieces. They were coming at us fast, but it was the French ships maneuvering that caught my eye. They were forming a line, trying to encircle us. Blackwell turned to us, his face set like stone. They'll try to box us in, lads. Don't let them. Fire when the signal comes, and don't miss. The cannons roared to life as the order to fire rang out. It was a sound I will never forget. The explosion from the first shot seemed to rip apart the very fabric of the sea, and I could feel the reverberations through the Victory as though the ship itself was alive and breathing. The blast was deafening, and the smoke filled the air like a storm cloud. The heat from the cannon was intense, and the acrid smell of gunpowder made my throat burn. "Fire again!" Blackwell shouted as we reloaded, the urgency in his voice fueling my movements. Each cannonball felt heavier than the last, and the time between shots seemed to stretch on forever. But there was no time for hesitation, no time to second guess. The battle was happening around us, and every second counted. The enemy was close now. The French fleet had moved within range, and we could hear the whistling of their own cannonballs as they tore through the air. Some of them struck the Victory, sending splinters of wood flying across the deck. The noise was unbearable. It was as if the entire world had descended into madness. I caught sight of my shipmates, old sailors who had been through battles before, their faces grim and stoic, and young lads like me, their eyes wide with fear but determined to hold their ground. I could see the strain on their faces, the sweat beading on their brows as they worked furiously to keep the guns firing. There was no time for fear. We were fighting for our lives. The battle raged for hours, the sound of cannon fire echoing across the sea. I lost track of time as we continued to reload and fire, reload and fire. But amid the chaos, I began to notice the carnage unfolding around us. Men were falling, struck by cannonballs or shrapnel. The deck was slick with blood. I saw young Finch, a boy who had been only 16 when he joined the crew, fall to the ground, his chest torn open by a French cannonball. His eyes were wide with shock, and for a moment, I thought he might still be alive, but then I saw the blood pooling beneath him. "Finish the job, lads!" shouted Blackwell, his voice booming above the chaos. "This is our moment. We cannot let them take it from us." And then, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, something changed. The Victory surged forward, cutting through the smoke and debris. Our sails snapped, the wind catching them with a deafening roar. We were closing in on L'Aigle, the French flagship, and it was clear that the battle was turning in our favor. The enemy ships were now in disarray, their lines broken, their morale shattered. We had them. With one final roar, the Victory unleashed its broadside, sending a barrage of cannonballs crashing into the side of L'Aigle. The French flagship shuddered under the impact, her sails torn and her hull ruptured. I watched as the ship rocked back and forth, the crew surrendering in droves. Victory was ours, but even as we cheered, there was no elation. Instead, there was a somber quiet that fell over the deck. The battle had cost us dearly. The Victory had been riddled with damage, and many men, brave men, had been lost. I stood, bloodied and exhausted, looking out over the battlefield. The French ships were retreating, but the cost of the Victory had been high. For every man we lost, for every life taken by cannon fire or drowning in the cold sea, the Victory felt less like triumph and more like a grim necessity. In the days that followed, we sailed back to England, our sails tattered and our hearts heavy. The victory at Trafalgar had been a turning point in the war, but it had come at a cost that none of us would ever forget. As I stood by the side of gun Captain Blackwell, I thought about the men who had fallen, the ones whose names would never be known outside of this ship. They were the forgotten heroes, the ones who had sacrificed everything so that we might live to see another day. Blackwell clapped me on the shoulder. "You did well, lad," he said quietly. "You'll make a fine sailor yet." And though I was proud of our victory, a part of me couldn't shake the image of Finch's lifeless body, the last of his youth forever stolen by the sea. But we had done it. We had done our duty. And in the years to come, the name Trafalgar would live on in the annals of history, not just as the site of a great victory, but as a reminder of the sacrifices made by the men who fought and died to secure that victory. If you're enjoying this story, please remember to hit like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue creating content that educates and empowers. To learn more about South Africa's leading accessibility software and to support our dyslexic-friendly initiative, visit www.polispeaks4u.co.za.